Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the fifth day, January 2024. This is part two of um, Man's Two Births by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Um, I hope everyone's having a good day. It's been a nice day here, except it's been a little cool. Um, and I wanted to share something before we start and give you an idea. Um, a little bit of the past information about Alvin Boyd Kuhn, because sometimes I forget. So Alvin Boyd Kuhn was born September 22nd, 1880, and he passed away September 14th, 1963. So at that point, I was born in 1960, so basically I was a little over 3 years old after he passed away. He was an American theolophist. He was a lecturer and self-published author. He was a proponent of the Christ myth theory. He was born in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. He studied ancient Greek language at university. He attained his BA in 1903 and started his career working as a language teacher in high school. He enrolled in summer sections at Columbia University in 1926 and 27, and then quit teaching to devote to full-time studies in 1927. His thesis was Theosophy, a modern revival of the ancient wisdom. Was, according to Kuhn, the first instance in which an individual had been permitted by any modern American or European university to attain his doctorate with a thesis on theosophy. That's wild, isn't it? Kuhn later expanded his thesis into his first book of the same name in 1930, after uh, after attaining his PhD in 1931. He returned to teaching for 1 year, but then spent the next 30 years writing, lecturing, and running his own publishing house, which was Academy Press in Elizabeth, New Jersey. He was highly influenced by the work of Gerald Massey and Godfrey Higgins. Kuhn contended that the Bible derived its origins from other pagan religions, and much of Christian history was pre-extinct Egyptian existence as Egyptian mythology. He also proposed that the Bible was symbolic and did not depict any real events, and argued that the leaders of the church started to misinterpret the Bible at the end of the third century, which is the book I've already part of it I've been reading. It's just called simply "The Shadows of the Third Century." Um, haven't finished the book. Probably about a quarter of the way. Where we at here? Okay. Okay. So the author of over 150 books, essays, and published papers. Kuhn completed his final book, A Rebirth for Christianity, shortly before his death on September 14th, 1963, in Morristown, New Jersey. At the time of his death, he left two unfinished handwritten manuscripts. Several of his works have been published or reprinted posthumously, and many are available electronically. Some mythical authors, including Tom Harper, were influenced by Kuhn. Harper dedicated his 2004 book called The Pagan Christ to Kuhn, calling him a man of immense learning and even greater courage. Yeah, he did have a lot of courage. But you notice he self-published his works, which meant that simply is he would have not been able, pretty much not to be able to publish from other companies, because what he was writing about was basically way ahead of the time in religion and um, mythical thinking, that type of thing. And one of the single greatest geniuses of the 20th century. That's a pretty large deal there. Towers above all others of recent memory in intellect and his understanding of the world's religions. Harper notes that Kuhn gave nearly 2,000 public lectures, which were lengthy, detailed, and well attended, but claims that Kuhn's self-published may have resulted in a lack of attention to his work. Yeah, it's a possibility, but I think it might be the other possibility that he was afraid maybe not getting his works published at all. Lastly, here it says Kuhn's works have been dismissed by mainstream academia for their lack of sources and documentation. Well, that's always the excuse, you see. Misrepresentation of linguistics, misplacement of quotations, and so forth. New Testament scholar Craig A. Evans has noted that the views of Harper and Kuhn have been thoroughly refuted and is not followed by a reputable historian of Egyptology. Yeah, they're not. The reason why is all of them are in camp. They're hiding something, as me and Phil Langdon was sharing yesterday about this. They're hiding almost everything. In fact, um, we've been hiding a lot of stuff here. Let's see, I have something here I want to say before I forget. There's the whole idea of what they call the Anunnaki Chronicles, which is done by Zechariah Stitchin. Well, the problem with this whole thing with Anunnaki is that they claim that he's some type of alien or come from an alien race, when reality is that Anunnaki was a former pharaoh of Egypt, and that is almost been covered up. And you have other people that are actually pushing these ideas also. Um, it'll come to me in a minute, but there are two other authors I like to speak about, but at this point I'm trying to remember them. He's written these books simply, which I've already done this one, Esoteric Structure of the Alphabet, Easter, the Birthday of the Gods, Halloween, a Festival of Lost Meaning, Theosophical, a Modern Revival of Ancient Wisdom, Mary Magdalene and her Seven Devils, The Root of All Religion, and there's more here. There's just, Case of the Missing Messiah, which was actually published in 1990, which I guess was the ones that were not, after he passed away. Christ's 3 Days in Hell, Revelation of an Astounding Christian Fallacy. That was also published in 1990. Hark, Messiah Speaks, a philosophical review of the Krishnamurti's teachings in 1985. But anyway, let's get into the book here as we're trying to finish it. This is the second part of this particular book. So let's, here we are. So this is the second part is called The Challenge to Christianity. No intelligent reader can peruse this assemblage of semantic data without being profoundly impressed by at least two considerations of the most momentous gravity. You will see first that the great principles of theology were presumed, rather are concealed. It would be permissible to say under the cryptographical forms of astrological symbolism. Then he will be impressed beyond measure by the incontestable evidence of fact that the biblical events he has assumed were historical occurrence in the first century AD were already written in time-worn books of the ancient Egyptians thousands of years before. Yes, that's correct. And that they were there not as an objective history, but as a spiritual allegory. This is where most people make the, what's the word? They fail to see this, you see. And what happens simply is that it's a stumbling block, you see. And so, I grew up in this and I didn't know any better neither, that type of thing. Um, so let's see where I'm at here. Then he will be impressed beyond measure by the incontestable evidence of the fact that biblical events he has assumed were historically occurrences in the first century AD were already written in time worn. But okay, I said that. And in the train of reflection that would follow upon these recognitions, how could he avoid asking of his intelligence the question fraught with critical moment for the Christian faith? Were then the Gospels and the epistles of the Christian New Testament compositions originally written between the years 40 and 80, as we've been taught? That is the first century, which is what I was taught in seminary. None of us even questioned that. I didn't. I thought it might be later. And then they were also talking about simply as when we were talking about in seminary that there were other works that were coming out also later, and they were not correct. In other words, they were already shooting those down. In the face of the evidence here assembled, can there be much doubt that these Gospels and epistles were republications, I should say, of Egyptian religious scripts, revamped and redated doubtlessly by Julian influences in the first century of our own era? Does Christian history make any authoritarian pronouncement that would throw light on the question, in spite of all the fanatic zeal to obliterate all trace of the derivation of its literary heritage from antecedent pagan sources? There has been permitted to survive for us a statement made by the man who himself was chiefly instrumental in founding the Christian ecclesiastical system, the Christian historian and bishop Eusebius. In his famous ecclesial history, chapter 17 of book 2, treating of the Essenes called Therapeutico in northern Israel, he wrote, "These ancient Therapeuticans were Christians, and their writings are our Gospels and epistles." As if to correlate this declaration of the 4th century Christian's protagonist, the Dead Sea Scrolls now rise out of the mist of pre-Christian time to certify beyond cavit that the New Testament documents were products of the antecedent pagan religions. Yeah, that's what it's about, you see. If Eusebius' statement and the evidence of the scrolls and much other data point to the ancient origins of the scripture, there would then arise the further critical, or what I say crucial question: for what reason were ancient Egyptian documents of secret, esoteric, and occult spiritual lore, embodying the innermost teachings of the magical and Sabian astrological science, brought forth from their age-long sacred custodianship of the hierophanes of the mystics and spread broadcast to the world in that first century Christian century? The answer to this query is many-sided and complicated, but among other influences, there were one certainly that can be traced with considerable distinctiveness. This was the work of a philosopher too little credited with importance. That is, Philo Judaeus was born at about the year 1 AD. He labored in the early and middle portions of the first century to effect a synthesis of Greek Platonicism, Egyptian Hermeticism, and Mosaic Hebraism on a occult theosophical basis. His work could have given a powerful stimulus to the cultism of mystical spiritual science throughout the Mid-Eastern countries, as it apparently did lay the foundations for the great Alexandrian Philosophical Center, which, under the leadership first of Pantatians, then Clement, and then Origen, introduced these elements into Christianity. In the conjunction of his efforts with the currents of spiritual force emanating from such groups as the Essenes and the Gnostics, we are as near to a correct answer as we perhaps ever shall be to the question of the origin of Christianity and the publication in the first century of documents long in existence, but never disassimilated beyond secret guardianship into the occult societies until that time. It therefore seems certainly to be within the bounds of distinct plausibility instead of imminent probability that the rise of Christianity is to be explained on the truly human and rational grounds of a movement that was galvanized into momentum as a result of the first wide republications of the secret and sacred books of the hierarchy of very ancient Egypt. Many astute investigators of the provenance of the Gospels have been driven to the conclusion that the four included in the New Testament canon were traceable to and based upon what they are pleased to call a common document, which obviously most antedate these building upon it. Almost to a certainty, this hypothesis points in the direction of the true solution of the problem of gospel origins. Irenaeus, first Christian bishop of Gaul, which is in France, in the 2nd century, states that there was a multitude of gospels afloat in his day. It would be in accord with some accord with some positive data and many other well-grounded assumptions if one were to possess the thesis that the four Gospels of the canon were based not necessarily on any one common document, but on the collective esoteric tradition coming down from Old Egypt and found extant in Irenaeus' multitude of Gospels. The historical fact that the Christian scholarship has for 17 centuries spent itself in the effort to account for Christianity's upsurge and character formation entirely without reference to the mass of literacy, lore, or the antecedent world out of whose very womb it actually was born, is to be seen now as one of the most fantastical, eccentric phenomenons in all the religious history of mankind. It is only to be accounted for by the factual circumstances that the Christian movement was from the start motivated by psychology of faith, emotional unction, pietism, zealotry of the most ignorant and fanatic sort, gullible expectations of miracle and supernatural apocalyptic revelations with the cosmic end of the world, the ignorant literalization of Bible or biblical allegorism, all which elements bespeak of the wholly unintelligent, unphilosophical character of the mentality and the psychology that launched the faith, to which after a considerable time, the name of the Greek deified principle, the Christos, was attached. Beyond all contradiction, this list of prime psychological factors in an incipient push of Christianity explains its ignoring the whole great corpses of esoteric literature, which was unquestionably the garden bed of its growth. Furthermore, the invisible repudiation which the movement manifests to the body of the Lord of a spiritual science at once too intellectual and philosophical for the simple and uncritical folk who had promulgated the Christian faith attests voluble the plebeian status of the movement and its personnel. Let the modern mind essay to diagnose with accuracy that these outer symptoms amply guarantee the motif of a movement to promulgate a claim divine revelation from the universal all Father himself, and it will see on what low and unworthy basis the system of Christianity does indeed rest, completely floundering the noblest and most authoritarian characteristics of man's finest culture, his most piquant affiliations of aesthetics, refinement, scorning the intellectual delight in the classic poetry and philosophy of the great Greco-Roman exaltation, including the two great Hermetica and the Virgilial epics, the rabid pietism of the early communicants of Christianity, so filled as devotees with hatred of the pagan cultural treasures that they forced Jerome to recant his earlier statement of his addictions to the classical literature, lore Augustine away from his interest in the philosophy of Polonius and the esoteric theosophy of Manichaeism led to telling to street, what has Homer to do with the Gospels? Burned in a frenzy of wild rage the great Alexandria Library and murdered the esoteric lecturer Hypatia, Hypatia, as she took sanctuary at the altar and scrapped the flesh off her bones with oyster shells. Deeply enwrought in the texture of this anonymous aberration of good human intelligence are to be found, still weaving the somber thread of the tragic story of the victory of mass ignorance over sage wisdom, the true causes of the rise of Christianity. The elucidation then at a larger section, scriptural texts such as here presented must be seen as valuable and precious beyond all calculations. It reveals how the pietism, fanaticism that bred a hatred of poetry, music, and art, and a scorn of wholesome human pleasure, which has held pretty solidly to the present day, was generated by the twisting of the normal human mind into form of weird hallucinations by the literalizing of myth, allegory, drama, and natural and astrological symbolism in the mind of the uncultured masses. This episodical debauchery of religious culture that befell the ancient world in the first 3 centuries of the Christian era that is treated in full in the author's major work called Shadow of the Third Century is the crucial key to the understanding of the religious complications in the world today. It is a odd but a challenging reflection that one cannot well escape on reading this assemblage of amazing data of somatic significance that half the world and half boasting more or less justly of leadership in modern intelligence has been thrown for over 17 centuries under the spell of mental and psychological dementia that has given birth to the foulest superstitions, bigotry, and inhuman savagery recorded in all history, and that this tragic outcome has ensued to the result of the stupidity of a group of Galilean peasants in mistaking zodiac history for vertical history. So that is the conclusion of chapter 2 here of this particular work I'm sharing tonight, which is the second part of the work, what I call simply is Man's Two Births. And, I grew up in Christianity. I grew up in it immensely all of my life. I grew up, going to church at a very young age and having Christian parents who actually believed in a literal interpretation of that. And I believed that for over 40 some years, in fact, more than 40 years, until I would come to the recognition that something wasn't right. And it took me someone, because I remember talking to a couple of my friends, and at that time I knew something was wrong, and I knew they didn't want to teach church history anymore. I loved church history. I loved it. I mean, I ate it up. My interest was a lot to do with what I call the Anabaptist. My hope was to be a professor and to teach that in church history classes. But I came to the recognition that simply is what I was teaching was wrong at that very young age, a little over 40 years old, and realized I could not teach that. Now it's taken me nearly 20 years to unravel even more. And I've come to recognize that simply is all um, not just myth. Myth, people think myth is not truth. No, myth is a way of hiding the truth in order to share with those who may, how would I say it? You actually use mythology in a way of sharing a story about something, but the underlying thing is simply it is teaching truth. You know, like the three bears. Three is actually um, I forgot what I was going to say here. The three, metaphysical. It's metaphysical. The Trinity is metaphysical, you see. And this was never intention of all this. This is what people are not aware of. And I don't blame them. I mean, it saddens me that people are so involved in this and believe that, all these things are happening even today. It's coming from the book of Revelations, when in reality, it has nothing to do with that. That's what's so sad. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's just simply is that the Revelations are speaking about water, fire, and air, and earth. And there are numbers there, which critical. And I'm learning. I don't have all the knowledge. No, I don't. But I do know that I'm on the right path. And so, but I want to share this with others because this is um, I still live in the South, and most people are basically will believe, a literal interpretation of scriptures. And so that's their choice, and they have free will. I give them that. That's their choice. But I also have freedom to speak what I have to say too. And I think we're past that stage. Simply, hopefully, that we don't or we're not bigots about things like this nature. I hope. But anyway, I just wanted to share this tonight. This is the second part. Um, it's just the two births. You see, one is the physical birth, and you got to die. You're going to die. We're all going to die, you see. But we need to have a spiritual birth that takes place before we die. And that means simply is we have to die in the flesh and actually be born again, as they say. But it's not what people think. You see, the pastors and preachers have cheapened what is being told because they're looking at it literally. They don't understand. It's sad, really sad. So anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I wish you guys a good night. And we'll continue to read some works by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. We hopefully will be reading some things from Gerald Massey also, who was I would say his mentor because he passed away earlier in his life. But obviously, Alvin Boyd Kuhn was a brilliant man. So, all right, have a good night, guys. You take care. We'll talk to you later.